Embattled candidate Graham Plattner has officially withdrawn from the Maine Senate race after sexual assault allegations surfaced earlier this week. He denies the accusations, but President Trump's response to the scandal is still raising eyebrows. Himself a flamboyant anti-establishment disruptor, accused of a lengthy roster of negative personal behavior, which he declared either irrelevant or false.
It's really a question of whether or not you believe the woman. A lot of people say big falsehoods. He's in a bind. He's in a bind. But should they be able to do it? Well, I guess he's going to lose. I would imagine he's going to lose.
Joining me now is our friend Stephanie Grisham, former Trump White House Communications Director and Press Secretary, and author of the book, I'll Take Your Questions Now, What I Saw at the Trump White House. Good to see you, Stephanie. And look, I point out that you were once his communications chief. So what point is the president making there?
Well, that's pretty simple. Here's the guy who, his administration still hasn't released any of the Epstein files. And here's a man who has been accused of various misdeeds in that arena so many times. So he's trying to deflect. He doesn't want to say that what Graham Plattner was accused of is vile and disgusting, and he should have been rightly taken out of the race, because he doesn't want it to turn back on him with all of the accusations that have come up against him and allegations against him. It's just so peak Trump.
Yeah, well, I do want to point out some of the Epstein files have been released, certainly not all of them, and there's great clamoring for all of them to be released. But look, Democrat voters, they were willing to stick with Plattner for a while. But did Republican voters create this environment by repeatedly overlooking Trump's negative personal behavior? Not only getting him elected the second time, in 2024, but the first time in 2016 when he talked about, grabbing and and that whole Access Hollywood scandalous tape. I mean, have the Republicans effectively desensitized the public to what extent does character matter anymore?
I had in my notes before joining you that I wanted to talk about character, so you took it out of my mouth. But it should
great
matter.
minds thinking alike. How's that?
Exactly. The short answer is yes. I think that, and I want to say that Republicans, they weren't like this before. That's not the Republican Party that I grew up talking to my grandfather about. I think Trump has desensitized all of us. And this comes from a person who was with him when that Access Hollywood tape came out and stuck with him. It's easy when you've kind of chosen your team, your jersey color. In this case, I had chosen Trump, like most of the country, or half the country had and has. And you stick with them. And I think that it has made the Democrats, they made a mistake with Graham Plattner, and they were just wanting a Senate seat, and they forgot about character. And that's really not good, because it's just politicians, nobody trusts them anyway, right? They're at their lowest point in terms of people trusting them. And this did not help the Democrats, especially coming up on the midterms when things are so vital for them.
Can I also ask you about the DOJ subpoenaing New York Times reporters, 4 of whom worked on this plane swap story? Having worked in the Trump White House, why go after the reporters if, as DOJ is saying today, they are not the targets?
Well, they're weaponizing the court system and every lever of federal government that they can to try to figure out who the leakers are. I mean, this has been something he has wanted since we were in the first administration. I can't tell you how many times I was tasked with finding the leakers, who wrote the book Anonymous, Stephanie. And then I remember when the first family was taken to the bunker and I was accused of leaking that. It's not because of national security concerns. It's because he doesn't want to look weak. He's afraid of looking weak if he gets taken to a bunker. He's afraid that he looks weak if his brand new plane that he just spent millions and millions of taxpayer dollars on to get ready is not safe enough for the president of the United States and all the hundreds of people on board to fly. He doesn't want that to be a topic of conversation. And so now they're going to try to find the leakers and hide behind national security as an issue, which, don't get me wrong, it is an issue. The fact that we have a plane from a foreign government that our president is flying on that is not equipped to handle if something, God forbid, should happen in the air is absolutely criminal. And I don't understand how Congress is allowing it. I don't understand how the Secret Service, every level of law enforcement, the chief of staff and the deputy chief of staff of operations is allowing it.
Can I just ask, can you think of anybody within this current White House who would have pushed back on this happening, who would have said to him, Mr. President, this is not a good idea?
I'm sure that some people did, absolutely, but I'm sure he didn't care and said, we're doing this anyway. And I don't know what the answer is, because when the president of the United States, as your commander in chief, tells you to do something, you do it. But again, you're taking people's lives into account. It's not just the office of the presidency up there. It's also lots of people. And it's our country, and the safety of the president should be paramount to everything else. So it boggles the mind, but this is what he does to you.
So last week, as you know, the president's financial records showed that he cleared more than $2.2 billion in crypto and other investments during his first year in office this term. And a new poll shows most Americans say Trump is using his office for personal gain, even as gas and food prices, they are up 20, 30% in some cases. But the Treasury Secretary came to Trump's defense. Here's that.
Well, again, I don't think there's an appearance program. The president, this is an innovation presidency. So whether it's digital assets, whether it's AI, whether it's everything that is going on in the tech ecosystem, that all Americans are benefiting from that.
How much does Trump care when he's racking up profits? Is he disconnected from reality on the economy, except how it pertains to him? And how is his approach to bread and butter issues, do you think, different in this second term than what you witnessed in the first?
Well, in this second term, he's got no guardrails, which is something I warned people about, as you well know. But he doesn't have anybody who is really pushing back or trying to craft the messaging anymore. And even if there are people like that, he doesn't care, because he knows this is kind of his last go around. But to answer your question, he's a millionaire. Well, I guess he's a billionaire now at the expense of taxpayer dollars. But he doesn't. When's the last time that man walked into a grocery store? Same with our Treasury Secretary. They don't know what it's like to live paycheck to paycheck. They don't know what it's like to have to stretch your last dollar while you're at the grocery store. Here's a man who talks about gas prices like it's no big deal. But let me remind you, he gets driven around in a giant motorcade with all that gas, again being paid for by taxpayer dollars. So, and he even said in a gaggle that he doesn't worry about, I'm paraphrasing, the economy and people when he's thinking about that. So he's very disconnected. He doesn't care. He doesn't understand what that is. He grew up, he got a tiny loan from his dad and millions of dollars. So he's very disconnected. But again, he tricked us all with his plain speak, including me. He tricked us all. And now we're seeing the real Donald Trump.
So the president triggered some new questions about his mental acuity when making public remarks during the NATO summit. Here are a few things that he said while meeting with Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky. Let's watch this.
We had 111 missile shot by the Islamic Republic of Japan. Frankly, they picked the wrong country. JCPOC. What a terrible deal. You have a question for President Putin, George? Do you have a question for President Putin? Not Zelensky. Yeah, what would you like to ask him? Because I'm going to ask him that question.
JCPOA. I mean, has something changed? What is the main difference between the president that you see in the second term compared with the one you saw up close in the first?
I'll say that with the clips you just showed, I mean, having traveled with the president on many overseas trips, those trips do kick your butt. You're very tired. You're jet lagged. He does not sleep on the airplane. And so I can see a few slip ups happening, and I don't think maybe it's that big a deal. He is 80 years old. However, I've been watching him fall asleep in the Oval Office, and I've been seeing the way he's even walking lately. And I don't take any joy in that, honestly. It reminds me of when I first saw my grandfather after being apart from him for a while, and he's just declining. He's declining in the way he speaks, in the way he physically walks. Obviously, he's got these gaffes going on, but he just looks older. He's got these bruises and the swollen ankles. And I think all of that, sure. I mean, he's 80 years old, but it makes me sad to see the way he's declining and that it seems to be happening so fast.
Okay. Stephanie Grisham, it's awfully good to see you. Don't make it so long till the next time. Thank you.